Hello and welcome to Spiritual Book Club. I'm Danny and I read a lot of books. Today we're going to talk about secrets. We all keep secrets. There are some secrets we might even keep from our therapist, the person that we are spending our money paying to tell them our difficult memories and not tell anyone about them. Some might even call it a spicy memory. So you might have guessed that we're talking about trauma, and the book for today is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. So I'm going to start out by talking about the main thesis for this book, where it falls on the woo scale, how woo-woo is it, and then I'll read some of the most potent quotes from the book, and I'll close out by talking about who should be reading this book, who it's for. So if you don't know me, my name's Danny Fankhauser. I'm a meditation teacher, an astrologer, an energy healer, and a fiction writer. And I've written for places like Well and Good, Refinery 29, The Cut, Pop Sugar. And I also have a new course on the Insight Timer app about unblocking creativity with mindfulness. So let's get into it. So The Body Keeps the Score. When, I heard that title, a lot of people were reading it during the pandemic. There was a lot of interest in trauma and trauma recovery through that time. And what I assumed the thesis would be about was how the body is storing trauma and how emotional trauma can lead to chronic health conditions. Maybe even specifically, I've seen this in other books where they talk about how, this emotional issue leads to this specific physical issue. So I thought it would maybe be tying those two things together. There's maybe a little bit of that, but it wasn't really the point. The main thesis of this book was more about the healing of trauma. And the author has a lot of experience over many years working with patients directly and also doing a lot of research around different types of treatments. And so it's more, when we're talking the body, it's more about how engaging the body in treatments was very necessary, that it couldn't just be talk therapy. You can't logic with someone about a traumatic memory, but you need to engage the body in some way. That was the high-level thesis of this book. Beyond that, there were a couple big supporting points. Because of the author's experience in doing this work for many, many years, we get to kind of go back and see what it was like many years ago, even before PTSD was a known condition, a recognized condition, and how difficult it was to treat people before there was a name for it, an official name and diagnosis, and how that made it challenging and how it was much more supportive once there was a diagnosis, but that even still with complex PTSD, which is plays out differently than PTSD does, that it still becomes a challenge for practitioners in that they have to assign a condition that's doesn't really fit the person's issue, and that blocks them from bringing in the right treatments. So it was really interesting to see the history of that and how things have changed. With that, he also talks about medication and how that was something that was new that came out that really opened a lot of doors, that helped a lot of people. But that his take on medication is that psychiatric drugs should be used with other methods and in support of them, not really as an end-all be-all. So he talks against the idea of just giving someone a drug and sending them on their way, and that's become a problem in itself, that the psychiatric drugs are very supportive in helping with therapy and other treatments, but they're really only masking the symptom and they're not getting to the root of the issue. So that was a really important distinction that he made, and goes deep into the science behind it. So where this falls on the woo scale, really it's a 0. So Bessel van der Kolk is a medical doctor, a psychiatry professor, and talks a lot about individual case studies, as well as research studies that he's been a part of, or that he's led, or that he's worked with other people. So there's a ton of research. There's a ton of brain science. He really gets into the different parts of the brain and how they affect different parts of us. So the logical part of the brain, and then the emotional part of the brain, and how trauma is stored in the emotional part of the brain. So that's why talk therapy alone is very logical, so it can't access where the trauma is actually stored. So there's a lot of science in here. It's all very research-backed. That said, I think this book is of special interest to people who are into the woo-woo, because I think he makes a really good case for these other treatments that really have their roots all over the world in indigenous medicine and Eastern medicine, and just understanding that things like movement, things like yoga, are really able to be supportive in a way that what we think of as more logical methods just kind of aren't able to get into, like I said, that place where the trauma actually is in the emotional part of the brain. So I'm going to read a couple of the quotes that stuck out to me as being very powerful. So he says, "Our gut feelings signal what is safe, life-sustaining, or threatening, even if we cannot quite explain why we feel a particular way. Our sensory interiority continuously sends us subtle messages about the needs of our organism. Gut feelings also help us to evaluate what is going on around us. They warn us that the guy who's approaching feels creepy, but they also convey that a room with western exposure surrounded by daylilies makes us feel serene. If you feel you have a comfortable connection with your inner sensations, if you can trust them to give you accurate information, you will feel in charge of your body, your feelings, and yourself. However, traumatized people chronically feel unsafe in their bodies. The past is alive in the form of a gnawing interior discomfort." So he talks a lot about war veterans and people who've experienced other kinds of, maybe childhood trauma, abuse, and how there's this, he says, gnawing sensation of distrust in their own body, and really not being able to know if something is a threat or not. And so they're in this kind of hypervigilant state. And that's very hard to become free of, because they feel that they can't trust their body. And so they're losing access to, essentially, whether or not we're in a safe situation, it's our body that tells us to stay or to go, or to set boundaries or anything like that. And so it's like losing access to this very important information center. And so that's why it's so important to find these treatment methods that he goes over how you need to calm the nervous system first. Then you need to start listening or feeling into those body sensations. And then finally, he talks a lot about imagination and how going back and imagining that traumatic situation had gone differently can actually create safety in your body. And basically, you can't change what happened. You can't change the actual facts of the situation, but you can change the impact on your body and create a state within your body and mind that is healed from that. So I'll read one other quote from, this one is about a treatment method called parts work, or internal family systems. And so the man who leads that makes two assertions that extend the concept of mindfulness into the realm of active leadership. The first is that the self does not need to be cultivated or developed. Beneath the surface of the protective parts of trauma survivors, there exists an undamaged essence, a self that is confident, curious, and calm, a self that has been sheltered from destruction by the various protectors that have emerged in their efforts to ensure survival. Once those protectors trust that it is safe to separate, the self will spontaneously emerge, and the parts can be enlisted in the healing process. So parts work is much more complex, and of course, if you read the book, you'll understand all these different kinds of terminology, but what I really found in that quote, in that section, was this idea that there is a self underneath regardless of the most horrific things that have happened to people, that you can find that that undamaged self that's within, and that we all have that no matter what's happened to us. And that's a really hopeful message. So as a closing, I'll talk about who it's best to be reading this book. You might know that it was published many years ago, and during the pandemic it popped back to the top of the New York Times bestseller list. So a lot of people have been reading it. There's no shortage of people who would benefit from it. He also talks a lot about how common trauma is, especially childhood trauma, and really how easy it is to be traumatized, that it doesn't take really negligent behavior on the part of the parents. There's some very innocent actions the parents can do that just maybe they just aren't doing something called mirroring. They aren't understanding or seeing the child's needs. There's one very poignant story about he was observing a parent with a child, and the parent kept trying to play with a child that they were playing, and then the child got tired and kind of pulled away, and then the mom continued trying to play with the child, and how something as simple as that could show the child, oh, you're not safe, you need to, even though you're tired, you need to continue entertaining your mom. And so that creates then a pattern of self-abandonment that can continue into someone's adult life, and just create this pattern that they continue playing out. So, so really anyone could read this book. I would say that the one caveat is that you want to make sure you're reading it at the right time. There are a lot of stories in there, case studies that are difficult to read, and then also tend to bring out reminders of things people might have experienced. So that's something to keep in mind, that it is very, very deep and difficult material, and that even if something so bad didn't happen to you or anyone that you love or know, that there could be parallels. That's what I found. I often had to stop and pause when I read certain things, just because they reminded me of something similar on some level that I had experienced, and then wanted to take the time away to then process my own feelings about that. So there's a lot in there, and you read the book and then you feel a lot more empowered, and I think especially for anyone who's been frustrated with talk therapy or has felt that they've plateaued at some point, there's a lot of hope in there in terms of emerging treatments that you might not have heard of yet, but that could be very powerful for you. So I do highly recommend reading the book. I enjoyed it a lot, and check it out and let me know what you think. If you've already read it, jump into the comments, let me know what I've missed. Different things jump out to different people, so let's keep the conversation going. And with that, thank you for exploring the cosmos with me, and give me a follow on YouTube, and I'll see you next time.